All right, looks like we're live. Hello, I am just going to first take a swig of water from my 18th century mug. It's one of many that I own, made by the very awesome Mike Flaherty, who is a fellow living historian. He does a lot of different events and everything, and he made this mug. Like I said, I own several. Cheers. Take a quick swig of this. Take a quick swig of water before we begin. All right. So live streaming again Friday night. I hope to plan to make this a regular thing. Friday night at 7 seems to be a good time. So that's, at least right now, that's what we're going to stick to. So hope you're safe and well, and I, hope you're having a good, relaxing evening at home. And yeah, obviously, most importantly, hope you're safe. All right, so in this stream, this week, I am going to, as I said, just be going through two songs, discussing two songs that I am going to be arranging, getting musicians for certain parts for, and eventually recording and releasing. So these two songs are in the works. Now, these two songs, they're not original to me. They're actually two traditional folk songs. And, I'm no stranger to doing traditional folk songs. I have sung several through the years. I've recorded versions of Scarborough Fair, Greensleeves, and a couple others. I have performed a couple different versions of those two songs, as well as a few others, and I have done many traditional folk songs, sang them many times with my friend Chuck Austin when we've done my living room sessions on YouTube, and also when we would do a couple of gigs out, and also with the music group Wayward Companions. I've been with that group since 2016. It's been quite a while. What we do, for those not familiar with it, is with that group, what we do is, in layman's terms, we might be called just like a traditional Celtic, Irish, Scottish folk music group. However, we also call ourselves 18th century popular music, because we do a lot of different 18th century events. That's kind of like our biggest field when we're doing gigs. Of course, we're not doing any gigs now because a lot of festivals and events are canceled. However, when we do those, but when we do them, we largely do 18th century events. But we have been kind of starting to dabble a little bit, going into 19th century and a few other eras. And hopefully we'll be getting to do all that again sooner rather than later. But for right now, like I said, we've been exploring things like online tavern nights, as I said in a previous live stream. So you never know. But anyway, I have, through my own work, as well as working with Wayward Companions for as long as I have, I've not, like I said, I'm no stranger to traditional folk songs. And these two that I am going to be demonstrating, discussing, and maybe demonstrating a little bit of the arrangements for you tonight are two songs from the British Isles. You might be familiar with them, you might not, but although at least one of them you might be familiar with. But those songs are Health to the Company and John Barleycorn Must Die. So now those two songs have been performed by Wayward Companions, the 18th century music group I'm in, for those of you just joining us and not familiar with that, because I see that there's a few more people starting to trickle in. Welcome. But those songs have been performed in the music group that I'm in. We do a lot of old traditional music. I myself do a mix. I write my own stuff, plus I do some traditional stuff as well. But these two songs are typically sung by the male singer in the group, Tom. Tom and myself were the two singers in, like the two main singers in Wayward Companions. Every so often, Bill and Laura might sing a song, but Tom and I are the two most prevalent singers. And Tom has sang Health to the Company and John Barleycorn Must Die in Wayward Companions, but since I'm working on new music, I'm working on a new album which I plan to release next year sometime, hopefully spring of next year, but sometime next year. I thought, hey, you know what, I really like these songs, so you know, why not? Why not do my own, you know, my own versions of them? So basically, the way I am approaching doing a traditional folk song, so basically my writing process, or I should say my arranging process. Traditional folk songs, what those are songs that for many people, they're songs that songs where the origins, at least the original songwriter, is actually unknown. A lot of people, they might look at say a song like Scarborough Fair, for instance, and think that, because a lot of people tend to associate that song with Simon and Garfunkel. Whereas Simon and Garfunkel, they definitely helped make that song famous. Their arrangement is absolutely, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful arrangement. Sorry, that's my heater just kicked on. It does that every so often, so it might do that might do that here and there. Just warning you ahead of time, just kicked on. But like I said, I mean, of course, Simon and Garfunkel did a beautiful arrangement of Scarborough Fair, but they were not the original writers of the song. In fact, we don't really know who the original writer of the song was, because that song dates way, way, way back to very, very early England. And what you'll notice with a lot of those traditional folk songs is that many of them do have like 10 or more verses, because they've been added on throughout the years as people continued, to sing them and, become familiar with them, and then add their own verses. Throughout the centuries, these songs have garnered sometimes up to 20 verses. I've seen such songs that have that. So sometimes obviously you can't do all 20 verses when you're trying to record a song. So you have to pick, pick a few select verses and then record those. I mean, you can do all 20 verses, but you'll probably lose a lot of your audience doing that. But typically, yeah, you'll pick maybe 3, 4, maybe 5 verses that really stand out to you, and then, you'll construct the song that way. And that's what how a lot of people typically adapt traditional folk songs. And that's why maybe some verses are definitely more known than others, like say for Scarborough Fair, or even a song like Health to the Company, which I'm going to get into. I'm going to get into some of the history behind Health to the Company, as well as John Barleycorn Must Die, because a lot of people, at least it's been my experience, where a lot of people will tend to look at some of these old folk songs and think, yeah, that's cute, that's nice. Oh, these, people, singing these songs and, probably just sitting all happy in their village. And when really, a lot of these songs have really rich, really deep, really, really complex history behind them. I mean, so don't let their, apparent simplicity fool you. So begin with Health to the Company. Hey James, how are you? So Health to the Company. I do have my notes, because when I was doing, obviously, if I'm going to be adapting a traditional folk song, what I'm going to be doing, obviously, is researching. And even if I'm writing an original song that's based off of that's based off of like a historical event, because as you know, if you've been with me for a while, you probably know that I gain a lot of my inspiration from history and mythology. Whether I'm writing a song, writing a story, it's most likely it's going to have some sort of backdrop that's steeped in history and mythology. So so I'm going to start with the with Health to the Company. Now, if you play the video game Assassin's Creed, especially the Black Flag one, you might you know have heard that song. If you're familiar with the band The Chieftains, you might be familiar with that song. Health to the Company, it's a traditional, it's categorized typically as a traditional Irish song, and it's based on the long history of the emigration of the Scottish and Irish to the Americas, or the early British colonies as like they were at the time. And it is also suggested that the song might have been of Ulster origin, and perhaps derived from it was also maybe perhaps a Scottish original. And the song is also quite well known in Ireland and has varying lyrical text, and it's noted that perhaps it might have been penned in Scotland and maybe added on to in Canada. And you know, and where it was perhaps also composed, it's debated whether it was Scotland or Canada, according to some of the research I've done on it. Still doing research, so I might, you know, have even more findings down the road. But also the use of the tune. There is use of the tune in the 18th century American Liberty song, and it could also reflect an association with the Ulster Scots tradition, and I'll get into what exactly an Ulster Scot is in a little bit. And it's most it's also the Ulster Scots, also where most a lot of the early Scotch-Irish immigrants you know came from this community as well. So, you know, and the medley also resembles another whalers' sea shanty called Farewell to Tarwathie. And yeah, so that's even just a little bit of the origins of the song. And like I said, if you're familiar with the Chieftains, that's where you'll probably hear the most known lyrics, or if, like I said, in the video game Assassin's Creed Black Flag. And so basically a little bit on what the Ulster Scots are, because you can like really peel back the layers of the origins of this song and really get like a good feel for why this song was written and sung, and you know why it was like written the way it was. And so the Ulster Scots, looking at my cheat sheet here, the Ulster Scots, they came from the lowland part of Scotland, and they settled in the northernmost province of Ireland. And in the 17th century, about 1609, and they took up the majority of they do take up the majority of the Protestant population of Northern Ireland. And basically their scheme and their reason for coming from lowland Scotland and into the northern part of Ireland, the scheme was to confiscate the lands of the Gaelic Irish nobility and within Ulster, within the province of Ulster, and they wanted to settle this province with Protestant, Scottish, and English colonists. So a lot of really cool history there. And Ulster is also of the ancient 5 provinces of Ireland, and it's said to be the 5th of the 5 ancient provinces of Ireland. So yeah, so just a little bit of history there. And like I said, I'm still doing research on it, so I may uncover some more, but I do think that it is important to do research on these songs instead of just trying to come up with a composition and sing it. I mean, you can do that, but for me, I prefer to really understand the origins of the song, where it came from, and, you know, basically, and why the song came to be, because for me, that helps really to develop the feel of the song, and, you know, just really, I think, make my own interpretation of the song the best it can possibly be. Now, when I'm writing a song, okay, or adapting an old traditional song, I'm a very organic writer, okay? I mean, even like, and this also goes for if I'm writing a story too. I'm very organic in the way I write, which means I sit down and I just kind of like, whatever comes to mind, you know, I might, you know, record it, or I might write it down, just so, you know, so it's still there, so I still have that idea. I don't typically do an outline, for some people do. I sometimes, if I do an outline, it's mainly just to get my thoughts in order, just to keep my thoughts organized. So, but typically, I just kind of go with the flow when I write. That's just, that works best for me. But, you know, other people might be different. Now, there are times, like say if I'm writing original song, there are some times when a melody might, you know, pop in my head, and I'll just kind of like sound it out a little bit. I might record it in my phone so that I can remember that particular melody, or maybe a certain lyric might come to mind, and I'll put it in. I'll you know, quickly put it in. I use Evernote, so I'll quickly put it in my little Evernote app, and then I have it for later. And then I'll revisit it, and then I'll, you know, just kind of take that and then develop an idea around it. And then that's how a lot of like my own original songs and stories came to be. Now, as far as adapting a traditional folk song, typically, you know, I know the song beforehand, obviously, and also you know, I tend to, and it's weird because if I'm adapting a traditional song that's been around for years and years, I typically have an idea in my mind of what I want the finished song to sound like. Like I have in my mind how I want to do Health to the Company and John Barleycorn. Okay, I have those two in my, you know, those two songs. I have the finished products of what I want them to sound like in my mind. Help to the Company, I want to do kind of, I want to keep it very Celtic, very Scottish, very Scottish, Scotch-Irish sounding. But I do want to have like sort of a Celtic rock twist to it too, just because one thing that I'm looking forward to doing on these next recordings is combining old world instruments with modern instruments, because I do think that, you know, those can make a really, really cool combination. And I think a lot of bands have definitely done a lot of really cool creative things by combining those two together, and I'm looking forward to doing it as well. But like I said, Help to the Company, definitely keep the Scotch-Irish feel to it with sort of like a little bit of like a rock or fantasy metal twist. And John Barleycorn Must Die, I definitely want to keep the folk sound to it that so many people have played with before, have played with that song before. I definitely want to keep that folk sound, but also give it a very kind of gothic feel to it, with also obviously some, you know, some sounds from the British Isles, the Celtic Isles. So yeah, so that's what, you know, so I do have those completed songs in my head. However, when I start doing the arrangements and I start getting the musicians, and I start, you know, like, you know, with the musicians on their parts, and then adding my own parts to it, I mean, that can change. The song, I mean, it could take on a life of its own. I mean, those of you that write, you know, you are probably familiar with that. You might have a concept in your mind of like how you think the story is going to go, and then all of a sudden that story just takes on a life of its own. I've had that happen many times with my songs and my stories. So, you know, so basically, like, yeah, like I said, I have how I think I want the songs to sound, but you never know once you start combining all the different elements together. But one thing that I do typically start with, at least to give myself a blueprint, is the chords, the chord arrangements. And I have my keyboard here. I don't know if you can see that or not. Unfortunately, this is as low as the keyboard stand can go, so I'm gonna have to like reach a little bit to demonstrate a little bit of the chords. But I do have these chords for Health to the Company. So now that doesn't necessarily mean that those are going to definitely be in the finished product, but like I said, what it does is it gives me a nice little blueprint to start with, and then I can actually, I've gotten more in depth with the arrangements right here, and I show a little bit of that in my Patreon. Yeah, I go a little bit more into depth over my Patreon, but I do have like how, you know, basically how I want the song to go, and I was thinking of actually beginning the song a cappella, and having it a cappella with maybe some oceanic sounds in the background, and then just kind of started really hunting. And bear with me, I'm not warmed up, but just kind of starting it out a cappella, very haunting. Kind friends and companions, come join me in rhyme. Come lift up your voices in chorus with mine. Come lift up your voices, all grief to refrain. For we may or might never all meet here again. Yeah, so, and then have that, and then go into like an introduction of sorts, and then have the chorus. So here's a health to the company, and one to my lass. Let us drink and be merry, all out of one glass. Let us drink and be merry, all grief to refrain. For we may or might never all meet here again. All right, yeah, I'm getting a little more warmed up here, so sounding better. But hey, Eric, thanks. So, but just kind of start a cappella, do like an intro of sorts, and then and then like come in with the chorus, and then maybe have another instrumental, come back in with another verse. So so that's a little example of what that's going to be. And so that is Health to the Company, and I'm looking forward to you know, to definitely seeing where that song goes, and then releasing the finished product. Now, on to the next, John Barleycorn Must Die. I'm going to take a little swig of the water out of my 18th century mug. Alright, so, so, John Barleycorn Must Die. Now, kind of like Scarborough Fair, this song was actually, it became quite popular during the 60s and 70s, during that whole like folk music era. And it's kind of the same as Scarborough Fair, where a lot of people might associate it with the version that the band Traffic did. They did a great version, and also I believe like Fairport Convention, I think, did a version of it as well. But a lot of people tend to once again think that that was a song written during that era, when it in fact is quite old. And I was going through the history and making, just kind of making like little notes on the history of John Barleycorn Must Die, and it is a British folk song. It had its origins in the British Isles as well, kind of like Health to the Company did, and a lot of, and it's kind of personifying the cereal crop barley, which obviously makes beer and whiskey. And it is also said that this song was actually quite popular during the Whiskey Rebellion, which took place in Washington, Pennsylvania area, southwestern Pennsylvania, in the 1790s. And when you really, if you understand the history behind the Whiskey Rebellion, and then you also kind of delve into the history and what might have inspired the writings of John Barleycorn Must Die, the many different versions of the song, you kind of start to, okay, you can understand why this song was so popular during the Whiskey Rebellion era. But it is a British folk song, and a lot of historians, have drawn a link between the mythical figure of Beowa, which is a figure that stems from Anglo-Saxon paganism and appears in early Saxon royal genealogies, and the name Beowa is actually it means barley. Okay, and and Beowa, the Anglo-Saxon pagan figure, is associated with not only barley but also agriculture in general, and also he is Beowa said to be the grandson of Shefa. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Shefa, which is also Old English for sheaf. Okay, and speaking of Old English, I do have Essentials of Old English. I have a book on Old English translations, and there was actually, I found this a couple of years ago, and a couple of years ago I was actually trying to learn Old English, and I kind of lost it along the way, but hey, now that we're in quarantine, maybe I'll pick it up again. But yeah, the Essentials of Old English, and it was in, when was this published? It was published in, it was written by Constance B. Hayat or something like, I apologize if I butchered that, but 1968 it was published. So this is quite an old book. I found it, I can't remember where I found it. It was either in a thrift store, or perhaps, or maybe it might have been, one of those book nooks in the library where they serve coffee, they serve, just coffee, little snacks, and then they have just things for sale, sometimes antique, and old books, vintage books. And yeah, I think that was where I found the Essentials of Old English. So when I was doing research for John Barleycorn Must Die, and I was starting to come across these Old English terms and everything, I was like, I have an Old English book, and I was trying to learn Old English a couple years ago. So yeah, so maybe I'll definitely be delving into this a little bit further now as well. But it is a word for barley. Beo is an Old English word for barley, and there's also an Old Norse parallel to that word too, which is also a noun for grain. So so it is starting to make sense, like the connection between Beowa and John Barleycorn, and some people even suggest that Beowa and John Barleycorn are the same person, or like the same entity, same person. And And there's also a said to be also a connection, suggested connection between the mythical Beowulf and the legendary Beowulf. I don't know who all is familiar with Beowulf out there, but they do have similar characteristics, and it is said, like I said, Beowulf and Barleycorn, they're the same entity, they're one and the same, and noted are the details of Barleycorn's suffering, his death in the song, his suffering, his death, his resurrection, and it also celebrates the reviving effects of basically of drinking his blood, and which also can correlate with how beer and whiskey are said to be the blood of barley, you know, because you can make beer and whiskey, you know, out of barley. And there are several different versions of this song. There's the Scottish poem. Okay, there's a Scottish poem that is completely in the Scottish language, and also in the Bannatyne manuscript, if I can read my own handwriting, the Bannatyne manuscript of 1568, and also the English broadside versions of the 17th century. And that is, I would say, probably from where the most well-known lyrics come from. And Robert Burns, who was also a Scottish poet and lyricist of the 18th century, and he is said to be the pioneer of the romantic movement, and he's a Scottish icon. And the romantic movement definitely spearheaded a lot of movements in the artistic, literature, music, and, you know, architecture, and, you know, just that whole movement. And he did a very, I mean, he did his own version of John Barleycorn. Now, the different versions of John Barleycorn. There's Burns's version, which can go a little something like, there was 3 kings into the west, 3 kings both great and high, and they had sworn a solemn oath, John Barleycorn should die. So that's Burns' version. Now, here is the early English version, one of them, which you'll probably note some similarities, but also, you know, like I said, a lot of these old traditional songs have, you know, many different verses, and a lot of them actually have many different different versions. Okay, different verses and different versions of the song. So the early English version, which most people might be familiar with, goes a little which I'll very likely be doing this version as well. Goes a little something like, there was 3 men come out of the west, their fortunes for to try, and these 3 men made a solemn vow, John Barleycorn must die. They plowed and they sowed and they harrowed him in, threw clouds upon his head, till these 3 men were satisfied, John Barleycorn was dead. Yeah, so that's the one of the early English versions that, like I said, most people tend to perform and record. Earlier versions also resemble Burns's only personifying the barley, and Burns also wrote of the 3 kings. Whereas in the in an early English version of the song, the kings were then reduced to just, you know, just to simple men. They weren't kings. But But yeah, but here's another early version of the song. Let me see. So, Sir John Barleycorn fought in a ball, who won the victory, which made them all to chafe and swear that Barleycorn must die. And then there's another version that, you know, in which the Barleycorn takes his revenge on the miller. And there's just all different, that's what's great about a lot of these traditional songs, is just like there's so many different directions that you can go with them. But I really do look forward to recording these and just really getting the other musicians to do their parts, and maybe I'll do just like a piano or piano and voice only performance of one of these songs in one of these live streams, and I'll be more warmed up. I'll be more warmed up next time, I swear. But I definitely enjoyed showing you these and showing you these new songs that I'm working on adapting, and I'll also be doing some more of these, especially as I write some new stuff and decide to maybe adapt some more traditional folk songs, because I'll definitely be doing a lot more of those. I love performing them, love singing them. So I definitely enjoyed showing you some of this and talking about some of the history, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. And I will see you next Friday, 7 o'clock, again for another live stream. All right, you have a wonderful evening, and I will talk to you again soon. All right, bye.